The Marine sergeant in the training ring did not know who he had just called down from the benches. The drill instructor standing at attention did not know. The officers observing from the command platform did not know. The 200 recruits in dusty fatigue sitting on wooden benches did not know. Only 2 people on the entire base knew who the skinny civilian in street clothes was. The man who had just been referred to as the civilian in the back. The man who had just been invited into the ring so that a combat veteran could demonstrate what happens when Hollywood meets the Corps. The man who weighed 61 kilograms and looked like someone who had wandered onto the base by mistake. In the next 15 minutes, one of the most respected hand-to-hand combat instructors in the United States Marine Corps would have his understanding of fighting fundamentally altered. His brutal takedowns, his overwhelming aggression, his combat-tested techniques, everything he believed about the supremacy of raw force, would be challenged by a man he had assumed knew nothing about real warfare. He had picked the wrong demonstration partner. It happened on a scorching afternoon in 1968. This is the story that changed how the military viewed martial arts. The training yard was exactly what you would expect from a Marine Corps base. No frills, no aesthetics. Pure function, a large dirt ring had been marked out with white tape. The boundaries precise despite the informal setting. Wooden benches arranged in concentric semicircles faced the ring, their surfaces weathered gray by sun and salt air. Behind the benches stood pull-up bars, rope climbing stations, and the obstacle course that every recruit grew to hate and respect in equal measure. The sun hung directly overhead, brutal and unforgiving. The temperature was pushing 38 degrees Celsius. The air smelled of sweat, gun oil, and the faint tang of ocean salt drifting in from the Pacific, just a few kilometers west. Dust kicked up with every movement, coating boots and fatigues in a fine layer of California earth. This was Camp Pendleton, one of the largest Marine Corps bases in the country, and today it was hosting something unusual, a combat effectiveness demonstration day, an experimental program designed to test new hand-to-hand combat techniques for the reality of Vietnam, aero warfare, close quarters combat, knife defense, rapid incapacitation. The kind of fighting that happened in tunnels, in jungle clearings, in situations where rifles jammed and bayonets broke, and all you had left were your hands and your will to survive. Approximately 200 people had gathered around the training ring. Most were fresh recruits, young men in their late teens and early 20s, their fatigues still crisp, their faces still soft. They sat on the benches in neat rows, their posture military, straight even in the heat. Behind them stood the drill instructors, hardened men with sun-weathered faces and voices like gravel. And on a raised platform to the side sat several officers, clipboards in hand evaluating the day's demonstrations. Mixed among the military personnel were a handful of civilian observers, martial arts instructors from nearby dojos, consultants brought in to evaluate different combat systems, researchers studying the psychology of hand-to-hand combat. They sat separately from the recruits, their civilian clothes marking them as outsiders in this world of uniforms and hierarchy. The atmosphere was electric, aggressive, the particular energy that comes from gathering 200 young men who have been trained to embrace violence in service of their country. The recruits talked loud, laughed loud, their voices carrying across the yard. The drill instructors watched everything with hard eyes, missing nothing, and in the center of the ring stood Sergeant Mike Iron Callahan. Anyone who had gone through hand combat training at Camp Pendleton in 1968 knew this man. Sergeant Callahan was a legend, 35 years old, 1.93 meters tall, 105 kilograms of muscle and scar tissue. He looked like he had been carved from granite and taught to walk. His shoulders were so broad they strained the seams of his fatigue shirt. His hands were massive, calloused, the knuckles scarred from years of impact. His face was weathered, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. The face of a man who had seen things civilians could not imagine. Callahan had served 3 tours in Vietnam. He had fought in the jungles, in the villages, in the tunnels. He had killed men with rifles, with knives, with his bare hands. He had earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. And when he came home, the Corps had put him in charge of training the next generation of Marines how to survive close quarters combat. His specialty was line training, linear infantryman enhancement, a system of brutal, efficient techniques designed for one purpose, ending fights as quickly and violently as possible. No sport, no points, no rules, just overwhelming force applied with maximum aggression to vulnerable targets. Eye gouges, throat strikes, groin attacks. Techniques designed to destroy rather than subdue. Callahan believed with the certainty of a man who had tested his beliefs in combat that real fighting came down to 3 things: aggression, strength, and the will to hurt your enemy more than they wanted to hurt you. Everything else, fancy footwork, complicated techniques, traditional forms, was decoration useless in the chaos of actual combat. He had been demonstrating line techniques for the past hour. 5 recruits had volunteered to be his training partners. All 5 had ended up on the ground, gasping, tapping out, or simply held in positions they could not escape. Callahan had been professional about it. No unnecessary roughness, no showboating. But the message was clear. This was what worked. This was what kept you alive when everything went to hell. Now he stood in the center of the ring, his fatigue shirt dark with sweat despite the heat. He held a microphone connected to a portable PA system. His voice boomed across the yard, rough and commanding. All right, Marines, what you just saw is the foundation of line training: speed, aggression, violence of action. When you are in combat, you don't have time to think. You don't have time to plan. You react with overwhelming force. You attack the enemy's weak points. You end the fight before it begins. The recruits were transfixed. This was what they had signed up for. This was the warrior culture they wanted to be part of. Callahan continued. Now, I know some of you have heard about other fighting systems, karate, kung fu, all that fancy Eastern stuff you see in the movies. And look, I am not saying those things don't have value. I am saying they don't have value here, not in war, not when your life is on the line. He paused. The yard was completely silent, except for the distant sound of rifle fire from the shooting range. War is not a tournament. War is not a demonstration. War is chaos. War is dirty. War is you and another man trying to kill each other as fast as possible. And in that situation, the man who is bigger, stronger, and more aggressive is going to win. That is not opinion. That is reality. That is what I learned in 3 tours in Vietnam. That is what these techniques are based on. The drill instructors nodded. The officers took notes. The recruits sat forward on their benches, absorbing every word. Callahan smiled, a hard smile. Now I am going to make an offer. We've got some civilian observers here today, martial arts instructors, consultants, people who think they know something about fighting. So here is what I am going to do. I am going to invite one of our civilian guests to step into this ring. We'll do a light demonstration, no injuries, no hard contact. I'll show you what happens when movie Kung Fu meets Marine Corps reality. He scanned the benches where the civilian observers sat. Most of them looked away. They were martial arts instructors, yes, but they were not stupid. They knew what Sergeant Callahan could do to them. Then Callahan's gaze settled on someone in the back row. A young man, Asian, small frame. He was wearing dark jeans and a fitted black tee. Shirt no military bearing. No visible muscle definition. He sat with his arms resting on his knees, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral. He looked like a college student who had wandered onto the base to watch. Something about this man's stillness caught Callahan's attention while everyone else shifted nervously in their seats. This young man sat completely motionless, not frozen with fear, just calm. Observing Callahan made a decision. This would be perfect, small civilian. No obvious training. The visual contrast alone would make his point. The recruits would see this skinny guy standing next to a combat, hardened Marine sergeant, and they would understand immediately why size and strength mattered. Callahan pointed. You there, the skinny civilian in the back, dark shirt. Yeah, you come on down. Let us show these boys what happens when Hollywood meets the Corps. Laughter rippled through the recruits, loud, appreciative. They were already enjoying this. The drill instructors were grinning. Even some of the officers smiled. The young man in the black t-shirt looked up. He looked at Callahan, looked at the ring, looked at 200 Marines waiting to be entertained. Then he stood up. Ed Parker, sitting 3 rows behind the young man, felt his stomach drop. He was the civilian liaison who had arranged today's demonstration. He was the one who had invited this particular observer to the base, and he knew with absolute certainty that Sergeant Callahan had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. Ed leaned over to the man next to him, a local Kenpo instructor named Frank. His voice was barely audible over the crowd noise. This is going to change everything. Frank frowned. What do you mean? Ed Parker did not answer. He was watching Bruce Lee walk toward the ring with that distinctive unhurried grace. Ed had seen Bruce demonstrate before. He knew what was coming, and he knew that in about 15 minutes, 200 Marines were going to have their understanding of combat fundamentally challenged. Bruce reached the ring and stepped over the white tape boundary. He walked to the center of the dirt circle, his movements economical and precise. For the first time, Sergeant Mike Callahan and Bruce Lee stood face to face. The contrast was staggering. Callahan was enormous, 1.93 meters of combat, hardened muscle. His presence was overwhelming. Physically imposing, Callahan looked like what he was, a weapon shaped like a man. Bruce was tiny by comparison, 1.7 meters tall, 61 kilograms. Standing next to Callahan, he looked like a child next to his father. His arms were lean, his frame was compact. He wore civilian clothes that emphasized how out of place he looked in this military environment. The recruits were already laughing. This was going to be good. Callahan extended his hand. Bruce shook it. Callahan noticed immediately that the handshake was unusually firm, not the soft grip of a civilian, the confident grip of someone who knew their own strength. He also noticed Bruce's forearms, disproportionately thick and developed, the forearms of someone who trained with their hands every day. Callahan dismissed both observations. Strong grip did not stop takedowns. Developed forearms did not close a 23-centimeter height gap. "What is your name?" Callahan asked, his voice carrying through the microphone. Bruce Lee. The name meant nothing to Callahan. He had never heard it. "You practice any martial arts, Bruce?" "Yes." "What style?" "Chinese martial arts." Callahan nodded. He had opinions about Chinese martial arts, though he was professional enough not to voice them in quite the same way he would in the barracks. In the military combatives world of 1968, Kung Fu was considered theatrical, movie stuff. Lots of jumping and spinning and movements that looked impressive but collapsed the moment someone grabbed you with serious intent and tried to break your arm. Callahan turned to address the audience, speaking into the microphone. "All right, Marines. We got a volunteer Bruce here practices Kung Fu. Let's give him a round of applause for having the courage to step into this ring." Applause, loud and sarcastic. The recruits were having fun. They felt sorry for Bruce, but they were also entertained. This was better than sitting through another lecture. Callahan turned back to Bruce, lowering his voice slightly. "Listen, I am not going to hurt you. This is just a demonstration. I am going to execute some basic takedowns and strikes. You react however your training tells you to react. Just do your best." "All right, I'll go easy." Bruce nodded. "I understand. Good, you ready?" "I am ready." Callahan handed the microphone to a drill instructor standing outside the ring. He assumed his combat stance, feet shoulder, width apart, weight balanced, hands up and open, ready to grab or strike. His posture radiated controlled violence. The stance of a man who had used these techniques to stay alive. Bruce stood in the center of the ring, no stance, no guard, hands at his sides, feet together, completely relaxed. He looked like someone waiting in line at a grocery store. 200 Marines leaned forward. This was going to be over quickly. Callahan moved, not the careful, measured approach of a demonstration, the explosive forward rush of line training. Speed, aggression, violence of action. He closed the distance in one long step, his hands reaching for Bruce's collar and shoulder, setting up a basic but devastating neck crank takedown. Bruce did not brace, did not pull away, did not retreat. He moved forward into the attack. A small, precise step that brought him inside Callahan's reach at the exact moment Callahan committed his weight forward. Bruce's left hand rose and touched Callahan's right wrist. Not grabbing, not blocking, just making contact. His right hand touched Callahan's left elbow, and suddenly Callahan felt his attack dissolve. The grip he had been setting up simply disappeared. His hands closed on empty air. Bruce was somewhere else, and then Bruce's fingers were lightly touching Callahan's ribs just below the heart, a placement. A marker that said, "Here, this is where the knife goes." The touch lasted 1 second. Then Bruce stepped back, his expression unchanged. Callahan blinked. What had just happened? He had executed a textbook line takedown entry, aggressive, fast, committed, and somehow he had ended up holding nothing while this small civilian marked a lethal target on his body. The audience murmured. Something felt wrong, that had not looked like what they expected. Callahan reset. He was a professional. One failed attempt meant nothing. He assumed his stance again. "Again," he said. Bruce waited, neutral. Patient, Callahan attacked again. This time he varied the approach, a feint high, then a low takedown aimed at Bruce's legs. A wrestling shoot refined by 3 tours of combat, the kind of attack that had put Insurgent's face down in the mud so Callahan could finish them. Bruce stepped off angle, not a big movement, a small, precise adjustment of his feet that made Callahan's shooting attack pass through empty space. As Callahan committed low, Bruce's hands were suddenly there, one hand lightly touching the back of Callahan's neck, the other touching his exposed ribs. 2 lethal targets marked, controlled. Bruce stepped back again, still calm, still patient. The murmuring in the audience grew louder. The recruits were confused. The drill instructors were frowning. The officers were leaning forward, watching intently. Callahan straightened. His professional demeanor was beginning to crack. Not with anger. With confusion. He had trained thousands of Marines. He had fought real enemies in real combat. And this small man in street clothes was making his attacks vanish. "What are you doing?" Callahan asked, not accusatory, genuinely curious. "Intercepting," Bruce said quietly. "What?" "Your attacks have preparation phases, small movements that telegraph your intention. When I sense the preparation, I move before the attack arrives. I don't to defend against your technique. I attack the space where your technique is forming." Callahan stared at him, processing. "Show me again." Bruce nodded. Callahan attacked a third time, full commitment. A straight punch to the face followed by a grab and knee strike. A standard line combination designed to overwhelm and destroy. Fast, violent battle. Tested, Bruce flowed. His hands intercepted Callahan's punch with a rising deflection, redirecting it past his head. His left foot swept forward, disrupting Callahan's base as he set up the knee, and suddenly Bruce was inside. His palm pressed lightly against Callahan's throat. The audience went silent, completely silent. 200 Marines watching a 61-kilogram civilian neutralize one of their most respected combat instructors. 3 times. Without visible effort, Callahan stepped back. His breathing had changed, not from exertion, from the mental effort of trying to understand what was happening to techniques he had used successfully for 15 years. An officer stood up on the platform, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the base's hand-to-hand combat program director. He walked to the edge of the ring. "Sergeant Callahan, request permission to modify the demonstration." Callahan turned. "Sir, I want to see how Mr. Lee handles multiple attackers. Call up 3 volunteers." Callahan hesitated. He understood what the lieutenant colonel was doing, testing Bruce under pressure, seeing if his techniques worked against realistic combat scenarios. "Sir, yes, sir." He turned to the benches. Martinez, Johnson, Chen, front and center. 3 recruits stood up immediately. Young, fit, eager, they jumped into the ring, their boots raising small clouds of dust. They were grinning, 3-on-1. This would be different. This would show what happened when you outnumbered the kung fu guy. The 3 recruits formed a loose triangle around Bruce. Martinez was in front, Johnson on the left, Chen on the right. All 3 had been through basic line training. All 3 were larger than Bruce together. They outweighed him by more than 150 kilograms. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison spoke into the microphone. "Mr. Lee, these 3 Marines will attempt to subdue you using basic line techniques. Light contact only. Demonstrate your response." Bruce nodded. He stood in the center of the triangle, hands at his sides, waiting. Martinez attacked first. A straight charge, hands reaching for a collar grab. Bruce stepped forward into the charge, a move that seemed suicidal, and his hands moved so fast they blurred. A rising deflection sent Martinez, hands upward. A light palm strike to Martinez's chest sent the recruit stumbling backward, off balance. Johnson attacked from the left while Bruce was still engaged with Martinez. A tackle aimed at Bruce's waist. Bruce's right hand touched Johnson's head as he came in, guiding it downward while Bruce's left foot swept Johnson's lead leg. Johnson went face first into the dirt. Chen attacked from the right. A hook punch followed by a grab. Bruce turned into the punch, his forearm deflecting it with a circular motion. His other hand trapped Chen's wrist. A small rotation of Bruce's body, a subtle shift of weight, and Chen was suddenly bent forward. Off balance, his arm controlled in a position that would allow Bruce to break the elbow if he chose to. Bruce released all 3 and stepped back to the center. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds. Martinez was catching his balance. Johnson was pushing himself up from the dirt, spitting dust. Chen was rotating his arm, looking confused about how he had ended up in that position. The training yard was dead silent. 200 Marines were trying to process what they had just witnessed. 3 trained recruits had attacked simultaneously. Bruce Lee had not retreated, had not looked hurried, had not struggled. He had simply moved, and all 3 attackers had ended up neutralized. One recruit in the back row whispered to his neighbor. "What the hell was that?" Sergeant Callahan stood at the edge of the ring. His face had changed. The professional confidence was gone. In its place was something raw and honest. The expression of a man who had just discovered that his map of reality was incomplete. He stepped back into the ring. "Mr. Lee, one more time. Just you and me. I want to understand what you are doing." Bruce nodded. Callahan approached without the microphone this time. He spoke quietly. "I am going to grab you, full commitment. I want you to show me how you are neutralizing my entries." All right. Callahan reached for Bruce. Shoulders the setup for a basic control hold. The moment his hands made contact with Bruce's shirt, Bruce moved. But this time, Callahan felt it. Bruce's forearms rose to meet Callahan's inner wrists, not blocking, sticking, maintaining contact. And through that contact, Callahan could feel Bruce reading his intention. Every time Callahan tried to change his grip or adjust his pressure, Bruce's arms were already there, redirecting, dissolving the attempt before it could develop. It felt like trying to grab smoke. Callahan pushed harder. Bruce's hands followed the pressure, yielding where Callahan pushed, filling the space where Callahan pulled. And every time Callahan thought he had an advantage, he would suddenly feel Bruce's fingers touching his ribs, his throat, his eyes, light touches. Markers, points of no return. Callahan stepped back, breathing hard now. Not from physical effort, from mental effort. From the cognitive load of having to abandon 15 years of assumptions. How? He asked. How are you reading me that fast? Bruce looked at him with the calm expression of a teacher waiting for the right moment. Would you like me to explain? Yes. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison climbed into the ring. He understood what was happening. 200 young Marines had just watched their training get neutralized by a small civilian. That could go two ways. It could lead to questioning and growth, or it could lead to resentment and rejection. Harrison's job was to channel this moment toward learning. He handed a bullhorn to Bruce. Mr. Lee, would you be willing to explain your methodology to the battalion? Bruce took the bullhorn. He looked out at the sea of faces, 200 young men in fatigues, their worldview cracking open. He saw curiosity in some faces, skepticism in others, hostility in a few. He understood. These were warriors. They had committed themselves to a system, and he had just suggested their system had limitations. Bruce had been there himself. He knew what it felt like to have your assumptions shattered. I would be happy to, Bruce said. His voice through the bullhorn was clear and strong, carrying across the training yard without shouting. He turned to Sergeant Callahan. Sergeant, you are an exceptional warrior. I saw your techniques. They are powerful. They are efficient. They are proven in combat. Everything you demonstrated today is valid for what it is designed to do. Callahan waited. He sensed but Bruce continued. Every fighting system, every single one, including line training, is built on assumptions. Assumptions about how combat unfolds. Assumptions about how opponents react. And when those assumptions are correct, the system works perfectly. But when you meet an opponent who doesn't follow the pattern you expect, the system encounters problems. He paused. The training yard was completely silent. Line training assumes that aggression and overwhelming force will dominate. And most of the time, that assumption is correct. Most opponents will retreat from aggression. They will be overwhelmed by force. But I do not retreat from aggression. I move toward it. I do not resist force. I redirect it. Your system is designed for opponents who follow a certain pattern. I don't follow that pattern. The recruits were leaning forward now, listening intently. Bruce continued. When you attacked me, you moved with speed and commitment. But every single attack in any fighting system has a preparatory phase. Your weight must shift. Your muscles must tense. Your structure must align. These preparations are tiny fractions of a second, but they are readable. They telegraph your intention. And if I can read your intention before your technique arrives, I can intercept the attack during its formation. I don't defend against your attack. I attack the preparation of your attack. He let that sink in. 200 brains were processing. This is what I call Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. We do not wait for the attack to complete. We intercept the attack before it exists. We do not react. We act first, but we act in response to the preparation, not the technique. He turned to face the full audience. Sergeant Callahan asked how I read him so quickly. The answer is sensitivity training. We call it Chi Sao, sticky hands. When my arms make contact with yours, I don't need to see what you are doing. I can feel it. Your muscles tense before you move. Your weight shifts before you attack. Through physical contact, I can sense your intention and respond before your technique arrives. Bruce gestured to Callahan. Sergeant, may I demonstrate? Callahan stepped forward without hesitation. His pride had given way entirely to the desire to understand. Extend your arms, Bruce said. Callahan extended both arms. Bruce placed his forearms against Callahan's. Now try to touch my face. I will try to touch yours. We must maintain contact with our forearms. They began. Immediately, Callahan understood what Bruce meant by sensitivity. Every time Callahan tried to create an opening to slip his hand past Bruce's defense, he felt Bruce's arms already there, not blocking, flowing. following his intention, reading his movement through touch. Callahan's hands kept hitting Bruce's forearms. Bruce's hands kept appearing in front of Callahan's face, his throat, his chest, light-controlled, undeniable. After 30 seconds, Callahan stopped. He was grinning. Not the hard professional grin from earlier. A different grin. The grin of a man discovering something new. "I've never felt anything like that," Callahan said. "You are reading me through touch." "Yes," Bruce said. "This is why I can intercept your attacks. I don't need to see them coming. I can feel them forming." He turned back to the audience. "This brings me to my main point. Line training is excellent for what it does, but it makes an assumption that your opponent will react to force with retreat, with fear, with defensive posture. Most opponents will, but some won't. Some opponents have trained to move toward force, to redirect it, to use sensitivity rather than strength. Are you prepared for that opponent?" The question hung in the air. Bruce's voice grew quieter, but somehow more penetrating. "War has no rules. War has no weight classes. War has no referees. In war you might face an enemy who is bigger than you, stronger than you, who has trained in systems you don't understand. The question is not, which system is best. The question is, are you adaptable enough to handle what you haven't? T-Train 4, he paused, looked around, made eye contact with as many Marines as possible. Sergeant Callahan is a warrior. I have deep respect for him. But even a warrior can have blind spots. Even a combat-proven system can have limitations. The moment you acknowledge that your system does have all the answers, that is when you become truly dangerous. Not because you know everything, but because you are willing to learn anything. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison stepped forward. "Mr. Lee, can you demonstrate one more principle? I want these Marines to understand the concept of power generation you mentioned." Bruce nodded. He turned to Callahan. "Sergeant, would you be willing to help me demonstrate?" "Absolutely. Stand firm. Distribute your weight. Prepare for impact." Callahan widened his stance, lowered his center of gravity, tensed his core. 105 kilograms of combat, hardened muscle, rooted to the earth. He had absorbed mortar blast concussions. He had been thrown from vehicles. He was ready. Bruce placed his fist against Callahan, solar plexus. 1 inch between his knuckles and Callahan's fatigue shirt. No room for momentum. No room for wind. Up. No room for anything that made sense in terms of power generation. "Ready?" Bruce asked. "Ready?" The training yard was silent. 200 people holding their breath. Bruce struck. 1 inch. The sound was soft, muted. A dull, compact thud. That seemed almost anticlimactic. Sergeant Mike Callahan flew backward. Not metaphorically, physically, his boots skidded through the dirt, leaving twin trails in the dust. He traveled 4 full steps before catching himself, his arms windmilling for balance. He stood there, bent slightly forward, his eyes wide. Not with pain. Bruce had not injured him. With complete disbelief. 1 inch. 1 inch had driven 105 kilograms of solid Marine backward 4 steps. The training yard erupted. Not cheers. Shocked exclamations. Recruits were standing up, pointing drill. Instructors were shaking their heads. Officers were conferring urgently. The discipline of military bearing was momentarily forgotten in the face of what they had just witnessed. Callahan straightened up, brushing dust from his fatigues. He walked back to Bruce, his face a mixture of confusion and respect. How is that possible? You are half my size, 1 inch, how?" Bruce smiled, a genuine smile. "It is not about the inch. It is not about size. It is about structure. The power doesn't come from my fist. It comes from my entire body. Every joint, every muscle, every tendon aligned in a single direction, releasing energy in a single instant. The force starts at the ground. It travels through my legs, my hips, my core, my shoulder, my arm. The fist is just the delivery system, the last link in the chain." He paused. "You generate power the same way in line training. You use your whole body, hip rotation, weight transfer. But you need distance to build that power. You need space to wind up, to rotate, to drive through. IV trained to generate that same power from zero distance. Not because I am stronger than you, because IV learned to coordinate my structure perfectly." Callahan nodded slowly, processing. His combat experience was reorganizing itself around this new information. Bruce addressed the full battalion one final time. "I want to make something very clear. I am not here to criticize Marine training. I am not here to say Kung Fu is better than line. Every fighting system is just a tool, a collection of principles designed for specific situations. Line training is one of the most brutally effective combat systems I have ever seen. It works. Sergeant Callahan is proof it works. His voice grew more intense, but no tool is perfect for every situation. A hammer is excellent for driving nails, terrible for cutting wood. Line training is excellent for overwhelming force against conventional opponents. But what happens when you face an opponent who doesn't respond to force the way you expect? What happens when your assumptions fail? He let the question resonate. The fighter who survives is not the one who knows the most techniques. The fighter who survives is the one who adapts fastest, who learns fastest, who is willing to abandon what doesn't work and absorb what does. This is what I mean when I say be like water. He paused. The training yard was utterly silent. Water is formless, shapeless. You pour water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You pour it into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. Water adapts to any container. It flows around obstacles. It finds the path of least resistance. But water is also powerful. It can erode stone. It can carve canyons. Water adapts, and through adaptation, water overcomes. His voice dropped to something just above a whisper, but the bullhorn carried it clearly. Be like water, Marines. Don't be rigid. Don't assume your way is the only way. Adapt, flow. Learn from every opponent. Absorb what is useful. Discard what is not. Add what is uniquely your own. That is the only path to truth in combat. That is how you survive. The silence that followed was profound. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of minds being forcibly opened. Of fundamental assumptions being challenged. Of worldviews cracking and reorganize it. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison took the bullhorn from Bruce. Battalion, attention, 200 Marines snapped to attention as one. That, Harrison said, is what evolution looks like. Mr. Lee has just demonstrated that our current training, while excellent, is not complete. He has shown us blind spots we didn't know existed. This is valuable intelligence. This is how we improve. This is how we stay ahead of our enemies. He turned to Bruce. Mr. Lee, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I want to thank you for your time and expertise today. He extended his hand. Bruce shook it. Then Sergeant Callahan stepped forward. He came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. Not a salute of surrender, a salute of respect. Warrior recognizing warrior. Bruce returned the salute, though as a civilian he was not technically required to. Mr. Lee, Callahan said, would you be willing to stay this evening, run a special session for our instructors? We would like to learn more about sensitivity training and interception. Bruce nodded. I would be honored. The demonstration ended. The recruits were dismissed. But as they walked back to their barracks, every conversation was about the same thing. The skinny civilian, the takedown that never happened, the 1-inch punch, the 15 minutes that challenged everything they thought they knew about combat. The sun was setting over Camp Pendleton when Sergeant Callahan found Bruce in the parking lot, loading a small bag into the trunk of a car. Ed Parker sat in the driver's seat, grinning. Mr. Lee. Bruce turned. He saw Callahan approaching. He waited. Callahan had showered and changed into fresh fatigues. He looked tired, not physically tired, mentally tired. The exhaustion that comes from having to rebuild your understanding of your profession. I need to say something, Callahan said. I called you up there to prove a point, to show the recruits that real combat beats movie kung fu. That American aggression beats Eastern philosophy. That was arrogant. That was wrong. Bruce said nothing. He let Callahan speak. For 15 years, IV believed that combat comes down to 3 things: size, strength, and aggression. That the bigger, stronger, meaner fighter wins. That everything else is decoration. IV fought in 3 tours. IV seen men die. And I built my understanding of fighting on what I saw in combat. He paused. The parking lot was quiet except for distant sounds of the base settling into evening routine. Today you showed me I was wrong. Not wrong about line training, wrong about my assumptions, wrong about what I thought was impossible. You showed me that there are dimensions to fighting I never considered. Sensitivity, interception, structure over strength. And you did it with respect. You didn't humiliate me. You educated me. That takes character. Callahan looked Bruce directly in the eyes. Can you teach us, the instructors? Can you show us how to integrate these principles into our training? Not to replace line, to supplement it, to cover the blind spots. Bruce studied him. Not his posture, not his rank, his eyes. What lived behind them? What had changed? Sergeant, you don't need me to teach you. You need to teach yourself a different question. What question? For 15 years you've been asking, how do I overwhelm my enemy? How do I use my size and strength to dominate? Those are good questions. They kept you alive. They made you an effective warrior. But they not the only questions. Bruce stepped closer. The better question is, what happens when my enemy does T respond the way I expect? What happens when size and strength aren't T enough? What do I do when the rules change? Callahan was silent. The moment you ask that question honestly, Bruce continued, every opponent becomes your teacher. Every system you encounter becomes a source of knowledge. You don't need me to give you answers. You need the courage to question everything you think. You know, to feel uncomfortable, to admit that 15 years of combat experience doesn't mean you've seen everything. He paused. You have that courage. I saw it today. Most men would have gotten angry when their techniques failed. You got curious. That curiosity, that willingness to question, that is what will make you even more dangerous than you already are. Not your strength, your openness. Callahan stood at attention and saluted again. A slow, precise salute. Thank you, sir, for the lesson. Thank you, Bruce replied, for being willing to learn. Bruce got into the car. Ed Parker started the engine, still grinning. As they pulled away, Ed glanced at Bruce. You know what you just did, right? You just changed Marine Corps hand-to-hand training forever. This is going to spread through every base in the country. Bruce was quiet for a moment, watching the base disappear in the side mirror. Then he said something Ed Parker would never forget. Good, then the next generation of warriors will be more complete than the last. That is how systems evolve, through the courage of individuals willing to admit they don't have all the answers. Within 6 weeks, elements of Bruce Lee's interception principles began appearing in experimental Marine combatives programs, sensitivity drills, non-telegraphic movement structure, base power generation, not replacing line training, supplementing it. Filling in the gaps, Sergeant Mike Callahan became one of the most vocal advocates for cross training. He brought in instructors from different martial arts backgrounds. He questioned his own techniques constantly. He became known not as the sergeant who lost to a civilian, but as the sergeant who was brave enough to learn. When recruits asked him about that day in 1968, the day the skinny civilian had neutralized his attacks, Callahan would say only this: I learned more in 15 minutes on that dirt ring than I learned in 15 years of fighting, because fighting teaches you what works, losing teaches you what you don't know. And that day, I lost to my own assumptions. Best thing that ever happened to me. Bruce Lee never spoke publicly about the incident, but the story spread through the Corps, through the martial arts community, through the underground network of fighters and teachers who were starting to question traditional boundaries. And when Bruce Lee walked into a military training facility anywhere in the country after 1968, people knew who he was, not because of what he had proven, but because of what he had revealed. On that scorching afternoon at Camp Pendleton, a Marine sergeant called a skinny civilian into the ring to demonstrate the superiority of American combat training. He did not know he had chosen Bruce Lee. Now an entire generation of warriors would never forget. The takedown that was supposed to prove strength beats skill never happened. But the lesson it taught, that true power flows from adaptability, not size, echoes still 56 years later, in every gym where fighters are humble enough to question what they think they know. And somewhere, in a dusty filing cabinet at Camp Pendleton, there is an after-action report from 1968. The final paragraph reads, recommend immediate integration of interceptive principles and sensitivity training into advanced combatives curriculum. Observed techniques demonstrated clear tactical advantages in scenarios where conventional aggression proves insufficient. Further evaluation strongly advised. The report was signed by Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, and beneath his signature, in handwriting that was barely legible, someone had added a single sentence: the future of combat belongs to those who adapt fastest. Today we met the future. His name is Bruce Lee.